Welcome into another episode of the News4Jags podcast. I'm Jamal St here alongside Justin Barney. We're counting down to the draft. It is officially April. That means we're in full steam ahead.
Man, draft season, 24 days from today. Can you believe that?
It's tough to believe.
Man.
It's tough to believe.
It goes so quickly. Off season, in January, rolls around, guys are cleaning out their lockers. It just seems like forever until we get to that next season. It's here already. Free agency, franchise tag. I mean, everything is happening so quickly, and we're in draft mode right now.
We are. Look, at this point, it's all about what's next for the team. Any team that you're a fan of. For us, of course, we're covering the Jaguars. So what is the team going to do at 17 is the big conversation. A lot of people have a lot of ideas. We've talked a little bit about here with some of the things that we do, but I think today we're going to give kind of our pitch to the Jaguars, our plea, stand on our soapbox for what should happen on the clock at 17.
Right, now, I already know your soapbox.
You know my soapbox. But look, I mean, the hardest thing, at least for figuring out where even the direction to point this thing right now, is the Jaguars are at pick 17. So there's 16 picks in front of them that will impact what you do. It's not like they can sit there and be like, oh, you know what? We can just – Caleb Williams is going to be on the clock. Caleb Williams is going to be gone.
Yeah.
A lot of players, Marvin Harrison Jr., you're not bringing him to Jacksonville without selling the future of the franchise kind of deal. So those are some of the things that kind of make it difficult because 17 is almost smack dab in the middle. Mm-hmm. So you're right there where you got plenty of space below you, but there's a lot going on before you get on the clock to figure out.
I thought it was interesting that I see an ESPN story earlier today about mock drafts and players and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And they said it's 16 players have first-round grades. 16 players have first-round grades. The Jags picking 17. So I thought that was interesting. They fall just outside of that ESPN first-round. Guys who have first-round grades, they have 16 guys. Jaguars got 17.
Isn't that just how it is?
It's always that way.
How it works.
Always that
way. So one thing I'll go ahead and say, and we say this, I feel like every year, as long as Trevor Lawrence is the guy, you root for as many quarterbacks to get drafted ahead of the Jags as possible. Because sometimes when they start saying the number of those guys with first-round grades, a lot of times some of the quarterbacks don't necessarily have those first-round grades. Like, for instance, if Denver drafted a guy like Bo Nix, I'm willing to bet he does not have a first-round grade.
He does not. But
quarterback's going to bump you a little bit higher up the board because that is a position that you have to have.
Yeah, Michael Penix Jr. is another guy. I mean, does a team end up reaching for him if that run on quarterbacks happens? So always funky things that happen in the draft. It's a good draft if you're the Jaguars because you know quarterbacks are going to go heavy, maybe 3 to 5 quarterbacks before Jacksonville picks. They need as many teams to draft quarterbacks before number 17 as possible because that leaves them with a pretty good option at 17 if one of those or two of those quarterbacks end up getting overdrafted, which I think will certainly happen.
All right, Justin. So your pitch for the Jaguars, I'm going to let you go first here, and then we'll talk a little bit about your viewpoint here. What is your pitch for the Jaguars to do at 17? Stand on the soapbox, sell the car to me here, Justin.
Man, I'm kind of on the fence because I've gone back and forth on receiver, cornerback for Jacksonville, but my soapbox today will be a receiver. Jacksonville needs to get a franchise receiver. They don't have one right now. They got a lot of guys. Christian, that's no cheap shot at Christian Kirk, but his size, and he's not that true alpha. I mean, he's a great receiver. Saw how the offense struggled without Christian Kirk last year after that core muscle injury. So I think you have got to get a franchise receiver. Gabriel Davis is not it. Zay Jones is not it. Parker Washington, second-year player, showed some promise. He is not it. Elijah Cook's not it. So you've got to get a franchise receiver, a guy that Trevor Lawrence can grow with over the years. I mean, Trevor's going to be your guy from here to eternity until he retires. So you've got to help him out a little bit. You had that with Calvin Ridley a little bit, maybe a 1B franchise receiver. You don't have him this year. I think Jacksonville has got to get Trevor some help on the outside, a true burner, a big-time target, a 6'3", 6'4" guy who can go up and get that ball in traffic. Jacksonville has a bunch of guys right now at receiver, no dudes. They don't have the dudes out there. They've got to get a dude in this draft. Didn't come in free agency, or you got to make a move for a dude, like a T. Higgins, a Brandon Ayuk kind of guy. That would fill that need for that dude. Right now, receiver is my number one pick for Jacksonville. Cornerback close behind. But I'm not on the any other position right now. I want a guy in the draft, Brian Thomas, Rome Odunze, Marvin Harrison Jr. It's going to cost you to go up and get a guy like that, but I think it is worth it right now because you got Trevor Lawrence still on a rookie contract. I think you've got to invest right now in Trevor's future as a pass catcher, and I think you have to get him a legitimate number one target that's going to be with Trevor throughout his career in Jacksonville, be it Marvin Harrison Jr., somebody like that in the draft if you do not get it in free agency. So my soapbox, pitch to the Jaguars, Trent Baalke. If you're listening, draft a receiver, invest in Trevor's long-term, his trajectory is help him be that franchise, that generational quarterback we thought of. He's not going to do it with his current crop of receivers. That, to me, you've addressed offensive line, you've addressed other positions in free agency, cornerback, safety. Spend a first-round draft pick, be it at 17 or sooner, trading up, get Trevor his Jimmy Smith, get Trevor his Andre Rison, get him a bona fide number one to lead the team into the future.
All right, I like it, Justin. All right,
Are you sold?
You swaying me a little. Look, I like what I was hearing there. All right, let's actually you kind of touched on it at the end. So would you trade up? Would you go get a Rome? Because I don't think Rome's not going to make it to 17.
He's not.
Would you go get a Rome?
Yeah, and even to me, I think even a Brock Bowers is in the conversation if he falls that far. Because again, elite pass catcher gives Trevor something to deal with. But I would consider trading up to get a legitimate number one, especially if that run on quarterbacks takes a guy like a Bo Nix, Michael Penix Jr., and elevates them into those top 16 picks where you got a guy like a Roman Dunze who's fallen a little bit. You got a guy like Malik Neighbors fallen a little bit. You got a guy like Brian Thomas Jr. who's fallen a little bit. I think you got to do whatever it takes since you missed out on free agency. And I go back to last year on this because we knew heading into the season that Jacksonville was light on offensive guy. I mean, you needed some help in that offensive line. You did not have it. And we see what happened. I mean, it was a terrible year. Trevor stepped back. The offense was not consistent. They missed the playoffs. I think if you just continue to kick that bucket down the road, you run it back with a lot of the same offensive linemen, but receiver you got considerably worse at. A Calvin Ridley, Gabe Davis trade-off to me is not exactly fair in terms of that production. So I do think you run the risk of another step back on offense if you do not do something to address that glaring need at receiver. And to me, I think if you trade up, I don't think you're going to trade as high into that top 4 or 5 to get a Marvin Harrison Jr. You're probably talking a cost-prohibitive deal then. But come away with a Neighbors, come away with an Odunze in this draft. And to me, I mean, if you're Trent Baalke and you see that Marvin Harrison Jr. is what it needs to take this franchise back to that elite level that hasn't been in years, I think you do it and you invest in that pick, even if it costs 2 future first-round draft picks.
You saw a team like the Falcons do that when they thought Matt Ryan was the guy. They went and got Julio. Look, my biggest holdup, and this is my concern about wide receiver, is the way the draft is going to shake out. I firmly believe that, and I tend to look at it in the lens of you're at the pick you're at until you move.
Right.
So if they trade up for Rome or Marvin Harrison Jr. or Malik Neighbors, home run through the roof, you went and got a guy. None of them are going to be there at 17.
They're not.
Unless something happens and it's got to be bad before the draft, and we don't want that.
And Brian Thomas could.
Brian Thomas could, but I'm at least in the camp that I think he might not be. I think there is a legitimate chance that he's big enough, fast enough, and has made enough plays that he's going to be gone. I think there's a possibility 4 receivers are gone before the Jaguars are on the clock.
Okay.
So now we're talking about possibly wide receiver 5, which I love A.D. Mitchell. Don't get me wrong. Was an A.D. Mitchell guy before the hype. So I am an A.D. Mitchell fan. But when you start talking about wide receiver 5 in the draft, that means that some other position has had players pushed down. That's my one concern about 17.
What do you think quarterback-wise? How many quarterbacks you think are off? If you're saying 4 receivers off the board, what do you think quarterback-wise right now?
If 4 receivers are off the board, I mean, we're talking at least 3 or 4 quarterbacks, right? I mean, J.J. McCarthy's definitely gone. The question is, does Bo Nix or Penix move up into that conversation? I'm not as far on them yet. I think 3 quarterbacks, 4 receivers, so that's 7 picks. So you got 10 picks that have to fill the difference. And that could go anywhere. I mean, you figure Joe Alt's one of them, so that's 9. So at least 1 offensive tackle. And then the rest is kind of
couple corners probably. So, yeah.
a couple corners possibly off the board. You figure at least one corner is gone by the time the Jaguars go, right?
Yep.
So at least one. So that's my concern with receiver. That's my only concern. I do think I agree with you, and when we get to my pick in my soapbox in a minute, I think he's in the right vein.
Yeah.
You have to help Trevor Lawrence however you can, because if he's your guy, which he is their guy, the goal is to make him as good as possible, put him in as best chance as possible to succeed. The same way you see other teams try and build around their guys.
Yep.
Look, I mean, people give it grief. I mean, think about Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning's he's going to go down as one of the best quarterbacks to play in franchise, and not franchises, but in NFL history, right?
Yep.
The Colts and the Broncos did everything in their power to build around this dude.
Yep.
They were bringing in wide receivers, offensive linemen. Two teams did this.
Yeah.
And this is a guy that is considered one of the best to do it. So it shouldn't be a question of if you should be putting talent around your guy. It's what kind of talent you should be putting around your guy. What does he need to be at his best? Is it a top-notch receiver? Is it a Marvin Harrison? I'm going to tell you, it doesn't hurt. It definitely never hurts to have Jamar Chase down there somewhere. It doesn't hurt. Is that necessarily what they have to get? I don't know. Look, I mean, Doug Peterson's offense has never been predicated on this one A-level receiver in the past. And I mean, I thought there was even some growing pains last year with Calvin Ridley, who he's not necessarily like top 5, top 10 in the league, but he's a very good receiver.
Yeah, right.
But they didn't do necessarily. They were figuring out ways to scheme him open and use him, maybe because some of his deficiencies in his game didn't quite line up with what they were hoping they would. But there were ways that he could have been used earlier in the season that they weren't doing, because Doug Peterson and Press Taylor, the way they run that offense, they don't want to predicate it on, we're going to design this up, we're getting the ball to Calvin Ridley right here. They want to design it on, all right, go out. What's the defense giving us? We're taking that.
Yep.
This guy's going to go get open because the scheme says he should be open against this coverage, not because he's better than the other player. Right. That's not necessarily how. I mean, that's a part of the game, but that's not just how they predicate it. I still remember we talked about this at one point last season, because toward the end of the year before, when they made the playoff run, Doug Peterson talked about it in one of I feel like it was the Chargers comeback, where he said, look, we started thinking players and not plays. Right. We knew we needed to get our playmakers the ball, so we started thinking players and not plays. And I remember talking about that last season, saying, look, we're at that point where they need to start thinking players and not plays, and think, how do we get Calvin the ball? How do we get Evan the ball here? This was after Christian Kirk was hurt. How do we get our players the ball? And they didn't
have enough.
They didn't have
the players.
So you got to add firepower.
You've got to add that. And I think that was, painfully obvious to see last year. Offensive line, we knew going into the season you didn't have that strength in the offensive line, and it manifested itself in a big way. But you lose the Calvin Ridley aspect. You saw what the offense took a massive step back when Christian Kirk got injured, and he's kind of a slot guy. He's not even that big alpha receiver that we've desperately kind of paying for Jacksonville to go out and add in some way. And you've got to. You made an investment in offensive line this offseason with Trevor. You've got to get him his number one. Joe Burrow's got Jamar Chase. Tua, Jalen Watt. You've got guys. Quarterbacks can only be so successful when you're throwing to Zay Jones or Christian Kirk kind of guy. You need that true alpha, like some of these other quarterbacks do, and you see them. You see the Joe Burrow success. You know what happened with Joe Burrow? Offensive line stunk his first year. He got injured, blew his knee out. What the Bengals do? Invest in the offensive line and got him a receiver. Jacksonville needs to make that same the Joe Burrow path to Cincinnati.
All right, there it is. So Justin Barney wants the Jaguars to take the Joe Burrow path.
They've already got the offensive line. They need that receiver.
Who has the offensive line?
You've got Ezra Cleveland back, right? You've got Cam Robinson. You got Mitch Morse at center.
You feel confident about that offensive line?
I think the offensive line is better than it was last year.
The Bengals' path is, because remember who was the tackle this year or that year? He's in Detroit. It was a really good offensive lineman or Jamar Chase. They went with Jamar Chase.
Yep.
And it's worked out for them. It has worked out for them. They opted. We'll do my soapbox now. I'm going to, you kind of led me to it because I'm going to go a little bit of a different direction here. Look,
I think I know.
I think you know. Look, ultimately, I think the Jaguars need to help Trevor Lawrence one way or another. And Justin's way is helping by getting him a pass catcher. He goes the Cincinnati Bengals route. I think they should go a different way. Now, I am 100% an advocate for taking the best player available on the board. I think the way it's going to shake out is there's going to be a really good offensive lineman there, possibly a really good edge player, but I think the Jaguars need blue chip players. They have to take guys that they believe are going to develop into blue chip players regardless of the position. In most of the scenarios, my belief is that there's going to be a really good offensive lineman there. And the Jaguars have to improve the offensive line in front of Trevor Lawrence. Look, one of the strengths of Trevor's game is to be able to avoid sacks, but we've seen him do it too much. I mean, last year he got beat up and couldn't necessarily make his way around some of those sacks the way we've seen in the past and get out of those tough spots. The Jaguars have to continue to improve the offensive line. How do you do that? Invest in the offensive line. There's some really good offensive tackles in this year's draft. The Jaguars have one in Anton Harrison, who is part of this team for the future. Cam Robinson is good. He's a long-stay veteran who's been here, but the Jaguars could save $16 to $17 million by cutting him if they drafted his replacement. I'm an advocate for them drafting his replacement. Unless you get maybe a guy like Troy Fautanu who could play guard for a year, and then that Ezra Cleveland deal just doesn't necessarily look great for a little while, but you're building the offensive line in front of Trevor Lawrence. You want to see Trevor Lawrence go out there and pick apart defenses? Give him time to do it. How do you give him time? Invest in the offensive line. The Jaguars have skirted around investing in that offensive line overall. I mean, think about it. Anton Harrison was a first-round pick. Outside of that, Brandon Sheriff was a high-priced veteran. They've kept Cam here, who, again, good locker room guy who is a solid left tackle in this league. He will start somewhere else if the Jaguars decide to move on from him. Ezra Cleveland was traded for a 6th-round pick last year. Mitch Morris was a cast-off from Buffalo. Not exactly, top of the market center. I think he's going to be fantastic in that spot. He's definitely an upgrade from what they had, but it's time to invest. Now, what this also is going to do for you, it helps clear your books, because by having 2 rookie contract tackles, now you got your bookends there for the next 4 to 5 years locked up. So Trevor Lawrence can stay in there and look at his offensive line and say, you know what I got? A tackle on the left and a tackle on the right that's got my back. And then you can find guards and centers. Those guys typically go later in drafts. They're not necessarily that expensive on the free agent market. You can get those guys. It's harder to find those tackles. If the Jaguars have an opportunity to go and get a tackle to protect Trevor Lawrence, you go and do it. That's my TED Talk. Look, here's my thing. The Jaguars, look, he's giving me the thumbs down.
Thumbs down. I can't.
How many times do the Jaguars wear those white jerseys, Justin?
Yeah.
And how many times is Trevor Lawrence's white jersey all dirty at the end of the game?
I agree.
I'm just saying, for once, it would be nice if he started the game with a white jersey.
Okay.
And ended the game with a white
Let's
jersey.
see. Against my anti-offensive line at that point.
All right.
You got Walker Little.
You do, who's on the last year of his contract and clearly not a part of the plan for the future.
So if do you kick the tires on Walker this final season? Again, he's cheaper than Cam. It's his last year. I don't know. Do you kick the tires on Walker Little? Give him one more shot at that position and say, hey, you're our left tackle this year, Walker.
Here's the thing with Walker. Here's the situation there. Like, if they were going to kick the tire, last year was the perfect time to kick the tires.
They did. They kicked some tires.
No. Last year, he could have been your starting right tackle the entire season.
Mm-hmm.
And if you didn't draft Anton Harrison, if you went a different direction with that pick, and I know Anton was their guy, and they traded back to go on ahead and make sure they landed him, they could have gone a different direction. They said Walker's not good enough to be a right tackle with that selection. And you've kept Cam here. Cam's contract, technically, they could move on from that now.
Yeah.
They've still held on to Cam. They're saying Walker Little's not good enough to be our left tackle. They tried to put him at left guard. He got hurt when he got there, so I'm not going to say that's a finished grade there on what their belief is about it. But I think Walker Little is done. Could you kick the tires on it? Yeah, but does that make me feel better? Like, if you say, all right, well, we're going to move on from Cam, save the money, and put Walker Little at left tackle, I don't feel like the offensive line upgraded.
No, I think you're probably a wash right there, maybe a little bit of a regression, because I think Cam is the team's best offensive lineman. I don't think that's even a question, as many people who loved what Anton Harrison did as a rookie. He wasn't the team's best offensive lineman at all. He's probably the 4th of 5 on that team in terms of where he ranked. Luke Fortner was bottom of the barrel in terms of grades and stuff,
Sure.
but mean, Anton was one of the lowest rated right tackles in the NFL last year, and he's going to get better. You got to preface that.
He's growing. They put him on an island against some of the best pass rushers in the NFL. Yep. I mean, they asked him to block Chris Jones one-on-one in that Chiefs game, and it didn't go well. So, yeah, look, some of the grades are going to come back bad, but he was blocking guys that are future Hall of Famers as a rookie who did have a shoulder injury that lingered throughout the season that he had to have surgery.
So he's going to be better. Anton, just from historically and the promise he showed last year, he is going to be better.
Yes.
At least you hope he is. But,
the
progression, they're high on Anton. We both like Anton, think he's going to be around for a little bit. But is the gap so far between Cam Robinson and Walker Little in your eyes right now that there's that big of a difference? Are they closer together than they are far apart?
I think as pass blockers, they're not that far apart. Walker's in that realm. But as a run blocker, Walker's stanky.
Yeah.
I mean, Cam is much better in the run game than Walker is.
He's also a $17 million a year tackle.
He is. But here's my thing. And I know you're not sold on going offensive line in the first round. But here's the thing. After watching last year, the offensive line needs to be upgraded, correct?
Right.
I don't think Walker Little provides that upgrade. The reason I'm an advocate for at least the consideration of this possibly going offensive line in the first round, because I think the board is going to fall to support that, is because you have to upgrade the offensive line. As of right now, at best, you're treading water. Like you're saying, is your belief really that Mitch Morris, who's been a solid starter in his career, is going to elevate this offensive line from below average to above average? At best, he's getting it to average.
I think he's probably what Morris will add, and whomever else they bring in. I think a healthy Ezra Cleveland will be an upgrade. He wasn't completely healthy last year. I think Mr. Morris will be a significant upgrade. So I think Jacksonville, just on paper right now, is probably equivalent, percentage point wise, to where they were during that playoff season. The offensive line that year wasn't exceptionally great.
They graded out as 31st in the NFL. They made T-shirts about it. So that's my point, is that, look, you got a quarterback, and he is exceptional at being able to avoid pressure. That is one of the things he does. He gets outside. He can make the throw. He's very good at that. And he gets the ball off quickly, so he can make the offensive line look better than they are. I think they have to upgrade and stop, at best. Last year, they were below average. That playoff season, maybe we'll say they were average. But according to the advanced statistics that they even put on shirts, they were graded 31st in the NFL. So that is still below average. But let's just say that with the upgrades that they've got, that they're at average now. Mm-hmm. Where would you grade the Chiefs' offensive line?
I don't think the Chiefs' offensive line is exceptional at all.
Would you grade it as average?
I would say probably a tick above average.
A tick above average?
Juwan Taylor was bad last year.
He was bad last year. But their quarterback is better at avoiding pressure. Yeah, he's one of the, he's generational at that skill, as a matter of fact. But what I'm getting at is, at the very least, their bad offensive line is not exceptional. You're like, they're a tick above average. The Jaguars, they're trying to get to average. Yeah. So in order to get to average, and one thing the Chiefs have invested resources on that offensive line. They lost to Tampa Bay in the Super Bowl, and what did they do? They went back to the drawing board and said, we're going to invest here. They paid Jawan Taylor. Now, they may not have got what they thought they were getting, but they paid him. They invested there. They invested draft picks over the years trying to build that offensive line with big bodies. The Jaguars have to start doing more of that. They have to invest in those big bodies on that offensive line. Where to start? In my opinion, you start right now. You start day one. You put your money where your mouth is. We like you, Trevor. We want to keep you healthy. We're going to sign you to this big, fat extension, and we'd like to see you play all of it healthy.
Okay, in that sense, if Jamal's soapbox wins, I think you go get a guy like a T. Higgins. I think you go and get an Ayuk, somebody like that.
I'm good with that.
I think you have got to. I know you can't address every single deficiency in one NFL offseason, but offensive line, and to me, some playmakers. And that playmaker hole became far bigger when Calvin Ridley signed with the Titans. So right now, you feel comfortable trotting yourself in the season. I think the offensive line is serviceable enough right now to start the season with those guys right now. It needs some more talent, yes, But I'm not comfortable with Christian Kirk, Zay Jones, Gabe Davis being the guys that Trevor Lawrence is throwing to. And I don't care what you say about Evan Ingram. Evan Ingram is not taking a swing pass and turned into an 80-yard touchdown like a Calvin Ridley could have. That they are missing that playmaker substantially. There's nobody in that pass-catching core. I mean, as good as Evan was and setting franchise record, he's not a guy that scares you at all. I mean, he's not averaging 30 yards a catch. You need a guy that spooks the defense, the guy that can get behind him a la Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, something like that. And you got to find the guy, preferably in this draft at 17.
I mean, is there another player in the draft that could be there maybe in the second or third round?
Possibly.
That could spook a defense. There are guys with skills that are going to be out there. I mean, a guy like it. I mean, look, everybody was talking about Xavier Worthy after his combine. He's got speed that should spook defenses.
A little too small.
He's a little small. Okay, all right. No Xavier Worthy loved there. I mean, what about Xavier Legette from South Carolina?
Decent.
He's another bigger guy, still with wheels. I mean, yes, I do agree with you that they have to add to that wide receiver room. I just don't think they have to lock in. I am more receiver at 17 friendly than I am corner at 17. I am far more receiver friendly at 17 than I am corner friendly. Just because, look, I think receiver is a big need. I think 17 needs to be about helping Trevor Lawrence. Cornerback, when you look at the way corner works in the league, like corner is an important position. Nobody's going to argue that it's not. But teams, when they go to team building, the first thing that they throw overboard are cornerbacks.
Mm-hmm.
Jalen Ramsey, he went from the Jacksonville Jaguars to the Rams. The Rams got in salary cap trouble. They said, go to Miami. The Chiefs, they had an opportunity to keep L'Jarius Sneed. They had him there. They said, jettison him overboard. Darrelle Revis, toward the end of his career, bounced around. These guys that are these corners don't tend to finish their career in one spot if you're really good, because teams get to the franchise building where they start looking at the books and say, he's worth the salary, he's worth the salary, he's worth the salary. We might be able to live without this guy. Yeah. And they start moving on from players. We can go through the books of great corners in the NFL. Stephon Gilmore's doing it right now. He has been a defensive player of the year, and he is a man on a mission going from team to team as a mercenary, because everybody's looking at it and saying, look, you want this payday, and long term, we could survive with average corners on the outside. We'd rather have an above-average pass rush and just some okay guys on the outside than a extremely high-paid corner. And that's why I'm more anti-corner at 17 than maybe the average person. I also think some of the corners are going to be gone. But just from a roster building standpoint, give me an offensive lineman, give me a wide receiver. I mean, if we want to get real crazy, I'm good. Latu should be there at 17. I'm just saying, if they want to go pass rusher, I wouldn't cry either. So that's just kind of where I'm at on it. I know a lot of people are saying, like, corner's this big need. Corner. I get it. Look, they probably need a starter at corner. But we can get that in the second round. Where'd they get Tyson? Tyson started day one.
Yeah, very true.
And a lot of people are still high on Tyson. So why can't they do that again? I think that's one of the things that kind of gets lost in the wash here, is that there's multiple rounds in this draft. This is a good year where you should be able to get starters outside of round one. You should. But when you look back to recent history, we go back to the Devin Lloyd, Trayvon Walker draft. Who'd you take in that third round, fourth round, when you could have been? Who did they take in the third round? Chad Muma. Oh. So, which I bring that up because they just re-signed Oye Oluokun to a big deal, and that was a bad draft pick. Yes. Again, your third, fourth round, you're thinking that guy's a starter, and you basically, to me, with re-signing Foye to that big deal like they did last week, who absolutely deserved it, but that's kind of throwing in the towel on a Chad Muma. 100%. Any kind at the time that move. You and I talked about this. I know right after that happened. I like the Devin Lloyd pick better than I like Trayvon, but at the time I just thought the Muma pick was such a luxury pick. It's such a luxury pick because get a Trayvon who obviously plays a different position than Chad Muma, but your first round pick, edge, linebacker. Another first round pick, linebacker. Third round, linebacker. So you're just not a good thing. It didn't add up. I mean, even Ventrell Miller last year taking another linebacker, it didn't add up. They were trying to find the heir apparent for Foye. They were trying to be able to move on from him. You could have moved on from this offseason, saved a bunch of money, but it wasn't there. You could have let him play out the last year's contract and handed the torch to someone else. But Ventrell hasn't played a down in the NFL. Who knows how that's going to work out? And then Chad Muma's been there, and they have not seen the growth. I mean, he had an opportunity to play in relief of Devin Lloyd last year. Shucks, yep. Devin Lloyd's not even playing necessarily how they thought he would play. So there was no way around not keeping Foye in Jacksonville. He has been fantastic for this team. They needed to keep him, but I mean, to your point, that pick was bad because it was made in the vein of, well, we signed Foye to a 3-year contract. Mm-hmm. All right, so by year 3, the thought is Chad Muma should be ready to go.
Hey, we talked about this after the Muma pick happened, and we said, okay, why you draft Devin, Trayvon, and Chad Muma after you signed Foye? You know, at the time, you and I were like, man, Foye, maybe this spells the end of him next year in Jack. I mean, he could be in town a very brief amount of time. Mm-hmm. So that pick just was questionable from the start. So when you say finding a starter in the later rounds, that's the goal. Jacksonville just has not done it historically well enough for me to think that the Telvin Smith type of picks for Jacksonville, the Rashean Mathis kind of picks, have been so few and far in between for Jacksonville that it's tough for me to say, I'm going to find a starter in the 3rd round. Well, conceivably, is Tank Bigsby a starter? Yeah, I mean,
not yet.
Is Chad Muma a starter? No, never will be, at least for the Jags. So I'm hesitant with the Jags, pinning them up with a starter in the 2nd, 3rd round. Just historically, I'm jaded and cynical now.
Well, we'll see what happens. Look, I mean, maybe we'll do an episode on option players that are available at 17, and then do one on some of the players that should be available later in the draft for them. For some options, and then we'll give them a cheat sheet on who they should draft.
That's right.
When it does all roll around. Hey, look, we're going to have plenty of draft coverage come your way, even on draft day. You'll be able to tune in to News4Jags. We'll have an hour special on TV, and it'll be streaming online over on News4Jags.com and News4Jags Plus. So hopefully, if you don't go out to the Duval draft party, you tune in live online with us or live on TV as we get you covered with everything you need to know about what's going on around the Jaguars and who they're going to take at 17. We'll carry you all the way through online until they make that pick, and then give you a little bit of instant reaction, and then maybe have a podcast coming at some point.
I think you even had Christian and Zay stop by for last year, right?
We did. We had Christian and Zay hang out with us for a little bit, which was great. I mean, both of them are always fun. We'll see if we can track down any of the players to hang out with us for a little while during our lead up. So it should be a good time. Look, I'm always excited. I love the draft, and our shows have always been a lot of fun. So we're going to start gearing up for that, but we'll still have some News4Jags podcasts coming your way in the meantime. Thanks for hanging out with us, and we'll see you next time.